Good morning, Bato. Again, please forgive my voice, but I'm here with you. Learning Echot Chanukah, because if I cancel today's class, we'll never have time to learn Echot Chanukah. Tell me the story of Chanukah. That is not a picture of me. I want Elchanan posting online. There you go, Elchanan. Good job. Of course.
I could change to something else.
It's good. I already changed it for you.
No, you didn't.
Find out. But this time it's an embarrassing picture of you, not of me, okay? So who read their homework on Our Heritage about Chanukah? Not all at once. Okay, that makes nobody. Somebody tell me the story of Chanukah. Yes, Elchanan.
If you're talking about Hanukkah, I also have a picture of you on Hanukkah. That I could change it to.
No, let's not put any pictures of me, okay?
Mama.
So my kids wanted to come to class. I gave them Zoom instead, but that was supposed to keep them quiet. Tell me the story of Chanukah in a nutshell. What happened?
Just remind me who's ruling in Israel at the time?
The Greeks.
The Greeks. So the Yevanim, or what
Yeah,
we call it in biblical terms.
Yevanim is Hebrew. Yeah.
So the Yevanim were ruling in Israel, and they and studying Judaism was forbidden, and so like the Sifrei Torah and Sidurim and stuff were all taken, and so I guess there was a group of and you'd have to tell me exactly who. I haven't heard the story in a long time.
The Maccabim.
Okay, so
Maccabees.
The Maccabim were like like they were the people that still studied it, and they hid Sifrei Torah and stuff, and they locked themselves in a dark place to study, and they had enough oil for one night or to light it, so they have light so they can study. And it ended up lasting for 8 days.
It's a good variation of the story. I like it.
It's a
You were good until the lights were close. Okay, someone pick up where Eitan left off. So, there were a group of Maccabim. Take it from there. What happens?
That's what I thought happened.
You thought that's what happened?
That was a very convenient
It was also in your own version of it.
Wasn't it that the oil had been profaned or whatever you would say?
Which oil? In the dark room where they studied?
For the menorah, for the lights in the
Where?
temple.
There you go. The lights were in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple.
And they only had a tiny bit of purified oil or kosher oil, so to speak. And it's multiplied. But that's happened many times in Jewish history.
That's a good question. What's so special about the oil? Okay, so this is the story. Greeks occupied Israel. We lit a menorah. Instead of lasting one day, which was the amount of kosher oil we had, it lasted for 8 days. And ever since then, we've been celebrating the miracle of the oil. Everyone agrees to the story? Great. Okay, now that all that happened, but that's not what we're celebrating. So let's read it together inside. I actually don't.
Rabbi, this was in the first Beit HaMikdash or the second one?
As far as when the Greeks were ruling in Eretz Israel. So we are in our timeline of history. Someone have an English date over here?
It's the second one, I think. Yeah, it's the second one.
No, in the
Hanukkah?
yeah, but in the secular dates, what is it? It's the 2nd century BC, so that makes it the second Beit HaMikdash. Yes. So in our calendar, BCE, AD doesn't. But this is we have the Greeks who rule over Israel, and then later the Romans. Most of what you know about the second Beit HaMikdash happens with the Romans. But this is essentially the end of the Greek regime in the land of Israel. Let's read from the Rambam. If you have smartphones in front of you, if you have them, and if not, I will pull up on the screen here. Sefaria.org, SEFARIA. And then you want to click on Halakha, should be like the 5th option you have. And then on Mishneh Torah. Did you see that?
Are we looking at Sefaria, the halacha for Mishneh Torah?
Yeah, and then you want to scroll down till you see scroll of Esther and Chanukah. Did you see that? There is an app too, if you like the app. We use it enough that it's worth downloading it in your. Yeah, and then you want to be in chapter 3 of that. I'll pull it up on the screen just in case. So Maimonides, the Rambam, when he retells the story of Chanukah, this is how he tells it. So let me help you. If you're on your phones, you want to go to Sefaria.org. You click on Halakha. You then find Mishneh Torah. You scroll down till you see scroll of Esther and Chanukah. Do you see that part?
Yeah.
And then the way you get to chapter 3 is there's a drop-down box, like there's an arrow on the top of the page. You should be able to click on it and then select chapter 3. And if you're having a hard time, just look at your Google Classroom. You'll get a notification in just a second with the link. I just sent it out as a link in the Google Classroom. So if you have the app, it should pop up on your phone. Says the Rambam. Bevayit Sheni, the second temple. Kshemalchu Yavan, when the Greeks were ruling, Gazru gezerot al Yisrael, they made decrees against the Jewish people. Uvitlu datam, and they essentially prohibited the practice of our faith. So we're living in the land of Israel. It's our own country. The Greeks have invaded the land of Israel. They're occupying the Jewish land of Israel, and they're not allowing us to perform our religious freedoms, or have our religious freedoms. They did not allow us to study Torah and mitzvot. And they robbed us financially. They, like any other occupying force, they took our possessions. And they raped our daughters. Again, part of the Chanukah story, which probably they couldn't teach when you were in day school. Yes? It was a serious occupation of the Jewish people that involved not just the prohibition of our faith, but an absolute desecration of everything that is sacred to us and any of our freedoms. V'nichnesu leicha, and to add insult to injury, there's got to be a way. To add insult to injury, they enter our temple in Jerusalem. Upartzu bo piratzot, v'timu atarot, and they did everything that they could do to defile this place. V'tzar lehem l'Yisrael ma'od mipneihem, and the Jewish people suffered incredibly from them. Ulchatzum lachatz gadol, and they oppressed us in the most serious type of oppression. Ad sherichem alehem Elohei avotenu, until the God of our forefathers had compassion on them. V'oshiam yadam, and He saved those people from the hands of the Greeks. V'gavru b'nei Chashmonai kohanim hagedolim v'ragum. And there was a group of Hashmonaim. Hashmonaim is a family of Kohanim, of priests. So, just like I'm a Levi, but there are many people that are Levim. They're not all called Yonatan HaLevi. There are other families of Levim. There are families of Kohanim, of priests. These Kohanim who are responsible for the upkeep of the temple. These Kohanim had many families. One of them was the family of Hashmonai. Hashmonai were the Maccabees of the story here. They go from being the heroes in the story of Chanukah to later being the villains of Jewish history, but that's not for today's conversation. The Hashmonaim were the family of Kohanim that decided to uprise against the Greeks. V'oshu Yisrael miyadam, and with God's help, they saved the Jewish people from their hands. V'midu melech min haKohanim, and they instituted a king, meaning they returned Jewish government to its correct place, although with a slight variation. You're not the only one making variations today. Who was supposed to be the king of the Jewish people? Okay, Hashem, very good. Once we have a human king, which tribe is allowed to appoint a king?
Yehuda.
Very good, Achanan. Yehuda.
Yehuda.
Only the tribe of Yehuda, Judah. So as you know, we didn't used to be called Jews. Jews is a later development in Jewish history. Jews used to be called Israelites or Hebrews. At a certain point after the 10 tribes of Israel go into exile, and we're left with 1.5 tribes. The tribe of Yehuda, of Judah, and half the tribe of Binyamin. Essentially the majority of the people that are Israelites in the world that are left are from the tribe of Judah. So Judeans become Jews, and that's essentially where we get our nickname Jews. I, for example, from the tribe of Levi. So really I'm not Jewish. My family lineage doesn't go back, at least not on my paternal side, to the tribe of Yehuda. My mother's side actually does, but my side, if I were to be today in biblical Israel, I would identify myself as a Levite, not as a Jew. But today we use the term Jewish very loosely. The family of Kohanim, called the Hashmonaim. So we're going to use these words interchangeably. Kohanim, Hashmonaim, Maccabim, they're all the same people. They rose up and fought against the Greeks. And they did an amazing thing. They restored Jewish government to the Jewish people. But with one difference. Instead of returning the throne to the tribe of Yehuda, as it was supposed to be, there's a law that a person who is not from the tribe of Yehuda cannot rule over the Jewish people. They instead kept Jewish government to themselves. And they became the kings of the Jewish people. Now, this is a breach in Jewish history for many reasons. In their generation, what were they trying to do? They were good people. What were they trying to do? Take back the religion, take back the country. So why did they take over the kingdom also? Good people, a good reason. They're good people, these men. They needed to stabilize the Jewish state of Israel. You can't just take it back and then toss it to the next guy. They had to make sure this country was actually up and running. So that was okay. Temporarily, it was okay for them to hold on to their government. But really, it wasn't okay in the long term. In the long term, they were doing something terrible. And that was going to be the undoing of the Hashmonaim. But for right now, the Hashmonaim are also the priests in the temple, and they are also the kings in the Jewish government. The reason why this ultimately is such a big deal, who cares who's in government and who's in the temple and everything else? The Jewish faith as a nation doesn't have a separation of church and state. So that value is very sacred to Americans who believe very much in a separation of church and state, for the very simple reason that I think too many people on this side of the world suffered, also another side of the world, suffered tremendously at the hands of corrupt religion and corrupt state. And people get hurt from that combination. In Jewish tradition, the Jewish state is kept in check by the Jewish faith. The Jewish faith is kept in check by the Jewish state. There's a few checks, kind of in America, you have a Congress and a Senate, and not everybody can decide whatever they want on their own. Judaism works the same way. So we have a king. The king is sitting in the palace of his choosing, because they were not all in the same place. And he essentially is a monarch, but not an absolute ruler, because if the king wants to go to war, he's not allowed to just get up and drag the Jewish people into a war. He has to consult with, anybody know? The Sanhedrin. He has to get legal permission. Before he can go to war, he must go before the Jewish Supreme Court. Who can sit on the Jewish Supreme Court? Which tribe? It's a trick question. There are 70 elders. Who? The Kohanim are, some of them might be in the Sanhedrin. Who sits in the Sanhedrin? There's a famous Mishnah. And the Mishnah says there are 3 crowns in the Jewish people. 3 kingdoms. The kingdom of the royalty, that's the tribe of Yehuda. The crown of the Kohanim, that's if you're from the tribe of Levi, or the Kohanim. And the third, the crown of the Torah. The only one that you can take over without inheriting it from your parents is the crown of the Torah, which is why it's the greatest of all the crowns. Because to be a king, you have to be born to a certain tribe. To be a Kohen, you have to be born to a certain tribe. But to lead the Jewish people on the Supreme Court, you could be anybody. Any person who studies hard enough and who's righteous enough can be appointed to lead the Jewish people in the Supreme Court. So the Supreme Court essentially is the representative of all the people of Israel. They are the ones who decide on behalf of the Jewish people what is the law, who goes to war, all of those things. But that's not enough. Even for that, before they go to war, who do they go to? There's one man in the Beit HaMikdash, in the temple. And we're familiar with the term the Urim and Tumim. Have you heard of these words before? What are they? Okay, what?
They're on the breastplate.
They're of who? Very good. Of the Kohen Gadol, of the high priest. The leader of all the Kohanim in the temple. The Kohen HaGadol Mechav, the greatest of the Kohanim. He has a special breastplate which he uses to communicate with the divine. For another conversation in a different time and place. He's another part of government. You can't do whatever you want without the leadership of the Jewish religion allowing for something to happen. There's one last person who keeps all those 3 parts of government in check. And he is not allowed to be harmed or touched, though Jews are not always faithful to that message. The prophet. A prophet is somebody who we believe to be chosen by the creator of the universe to keep those 3 forms of government in check. In some generations, it's Yeshayahu, Isaiah, Yirmiyahu, Jeremiah. These prophets come to the Jewish people, and their whole job is to make sure who can tell a king what to do. A prophet can tell a king what to do. In any other monarchy in the world, who could tell a king what to do? Nobody. So when we talk about kings in Jewish faith, it's not a king like you're familiar with a king. We have a 3 or maybe even a 4-part government, all of which have to work with each other in order for utopian Jewish rule to make sense. And so yes, it's not a democracy like you're familiar with a democracy, but it's also not a monarchy like we're familiar with as a monarchy. When the Kohanim become rulers, you end up compromising one of the check and balance systems that exist in the Jewish faith. Because who's going to keep the king in check and who's going to keep the Kohanim in check? You can't confuse those 2 arms of government. It's a problem. But for right now, ignore that problem. וחזה מלכות ישראל יותר על 200 שנה עד החורבן השני. And we had Jewish political leadership in the land of Israel for another 200 years until the destruction of the Second Temple. Now paragraph 2. I should have a way to scroll this. Guys, forgive me, I'm going to turn off the screen sharing unless I can figure out how to... Yeah, there you go. וכשגברו ישראל על אויביהם, when the Jewish people finally were successful over their enemies, ואיבדום, and they destroyed them, ב-25 B'chodesh Kislev Haya was the 25th day of Kislev. In Judaism, the day always begins with, when does Shabbat start? On Friday night. So the day always begins by nighttime. So nighttime starts. So technically today is Sunday, right? When did Sunday start in the Jewish calendar? Last night. So when a Jewish person, not in today's world, if I talk to my rabbi and he tells me, come to my house on Sunday night, which night does he ask me to come to his house? On Saturday night. What you call Saturday night is Jewish Sunday night. What is tonight? Tonight's already Monday night. I know that sounds, you have to kind of shift your reality. I will not confuse any of you by saying, come to class on Thursday night and it's really going to be Wednesday night. I won't do that to you. But just so you know, that's why it's not that Jewish holidays always start the day before. The day before is the day of that you're So Chanukah, the miracle of Chanukah happened on the 25th of Kislev. The 25th of Kislev this year is next Sunday night because it's Monday. So Sunday night is going to be the first night we light Chanukah candles.
So quick question that I kind of always ask.
Sure.
Mariv, Arvit. So that would be the first prayer of the day.
Arvit is the first prayer of the day. Shacharit is the second prayer of the day. And Mincha is the third prayer of the day. Yeah. Though, you can also calculate days from when you wake up to when you go to sleep. So the morning service is the first prayer of your waking day, but not of your 24-hour legal day. So you could argue both ways for the fun of it. So what happens once they win the war? So they're fighting the war. The Kohanim have left the temple. They're not involved right now in religion. They've now become warriors. They're fighting for the temple. They restore political rule in the land of Israel. Once they've stabilized the Jewish government, what's their next step? To reclaim the temple. They enter the sanctuary. And they could not find one pure jug of oil, except for one. You can only light with that oil one day. So it was 1 day's worth of oil. What makes oil kosher for the temple? It doesn't have a special kosher symbol. What makes it kosher?
It needs to make sure it's still like holy and the sacred things with and people that are not and something that's not holy didn't touch it. Right?
Very good. Thank you, Hanan. So in Judaism, we have laws of purity and impurity, which we're not so familiar with today, because we don't practice them so much today. We don't have a temple. But certain things. So for example, if something comes in contact with a dead body, in Jewish faith, it now becomes tameh. The closest English word would be impure. I don't like that word because we use tuma and tahara to explain other things that happen in normal human life cycles. And it wouldn't be correct to say a man becomes impure, a woman becomes impure. It's not really what's happening. But in English, we, for whatever reason, borrowed the King James version of tuma and tahara, and so we've run with it. And so something becomes tameh when it comes in contact with a dead body. Death in Judaism is one of the most jarring experiences. Our rabbis were aware of PTSD long before people were familiar with PTSD. A Kohen, for example, who went to war, would never be allowed to serve again in the temple. Once they'd come in contact with death, it was too much of a life-changing experience to allow them to serve God in the way that was necessary. Meaning they were allowed to go to war. It was okay, but they weren't able to return to their previous place after that. It was a life-changing experience. When coming in contact with a dead body, you go to a funeral. A person carries a coffin. There's an entire process in Jewish religion of how to return back to your former self before you came in contact with death. Part of that means that the tumah, the impurity, for lack of a better word, of a dead body is so strong that even if you didn't ever touch a dead body, the very fact that I touched a dead body before, and then I shook your hand, or that I've touched a dead body before, and then I've touched my wife, and she has shaken your hand, has now made the dead body, myself, my wife, and you, all temeim, because you have contacted the dead body. If then you were going to touch your friend, and that friend touched this jug of oil in the temple, that jug of oil would not be allowed to be used in the worship of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it's very easy for something to become tameh if you don't take proper precautions to preserve the sanctity of the items of the Beit HaMikdash. When the Greeks come in there and they do some of the most terrible things in the temple, obviously anything they touch or they get to is completely defiled. And so we find one jug, and this is very significant. We've come back to the temple. So we've established Jewish government. We've put a HaShamayim king inside. We come to the temple, and then we need to begin the service of the Creator again by lighting the menorah, the famous candelabra in the temple. And we don't have oil. Now, how long does it take to get oil? Okay, well, you're in Israel. Israel, there's olives everywhere. How long does it take for a person to become pure after becoming impure? 7 days. 7 days is the number in Judaism, which means 7 days, and then on the 7th day they go to the mikveh and they come out. This is true for everybody. So if you find oil on day 1 and you light a Chanukah, how long will it take for you to become pure enough? You just finished war, you just killed people. How can you become pure enough to harvest olives and squeeze them for oil and bring them to the temple? It'll take you at least 7 more days. So you're going to have a gap between day 1 and day 8. And here there's a miracle aside from finding the jug of oil. So the jug of oil is a miracle in its own right. There's miracle number 3. And that miracle is that the oil lasted until they had enough time to go bring their own oil that they procured by natural means of going and harvesting and squeezing and bringing it to the temple. So this is miracle 1, winning the war. Maybe even restoring political freedom. Miracle 2, finding the jug. Miracle 3, that it lasted for the amount of days that it lasted. They lit with that oil the menorah for 8 days until they were able to squeeze new olives and take pure oil from them. For that reason, because of all this that we read, our rabbis of that generation. Who are the rabbis of that generation? They're the sages. What is their official authority in the Jewish people? What institution are they serving in? There's a purpose for everything I'm asking you today. I wish for you to stop thinking of Judaism as a religion. Because everyone teaches Judaism the religion. And there's a reason for that. It's a sad reason, but it's a reason. In this community, Judaism is not just a religion. Yes, it's a religion, but we are first a nation, a political nation, first and foremost. And as a nation, we have national institutions. So just like there is an American Senate and an American Congress and an American White House, the Jewish nation also has those institutions, or had those institutions. One of them was our Supreme Court, the Sanhedrin. Israel, the Sanhedrin is not a Jewish word. It's borrowed from Greek, which is a fascinating say about how deeply Greek culture and words infiltrated our faith. That our Supreme Court is named not a Hebrew word. The Sanhedrin, that is a national institution. So, if I could think of an example, you're familiar with American law a little bit, that certain governments have the ability to overrule other governments. So, for example, here in San Diego, there are zoning laws. You can do certain things in your property, you can't do certain things in your property. San Diego has the right to control those zoning laws, so long as they don't contradict state laws. The governor of California can issue certain rules that can essentially encroach on the city's ability to do certain things. So lately there's been a whole controversy about granny flats in your backyard, and the governor deciding that every property in San Diego should be allowed to put 4 housing units on each property, which could lead to tremendous problems or opening up the market, depending how you look at it. I don't care either way. I don't own a house here, but I'm sure if I did and my neighbor was building 4 units, I'd be upset. And so what happens? The governor has the right to tell the city, hey, sorry, our rules overrule yours. And I'm sure it's not as simple as that, but let's leave it like that. Who can overthrow the governor? The president. Essentially, they're federal laws. And federal laws, and here in San Diego, for example, I had a meeting recently with the police chief, and they're with us and a few other faith-based organizations and other nonprofits. And one of the messages of the police force to the community that was protecting immigrants and immigrant rights and those kind of things was, even though there are federal laws that would require us to report illegal immigration, we are in violation of those federal laws, and we in San Diego, at least the city of San Diego, doesn't agree that their police officers should be policing according to federal regulations. So that's one of those cases where the city is pushing back and saying, for whatever reasons, I don't care politically, they're pushing back on that. But usually, that's not how it's supposed to happen. In the Jewish people, when a Sanhedrin rules something, it's the definition of the U.S. Constitution requires for you to do X, Y, and Z. And it doesn't make a difference who your rabbi is, what community you belong to. You are, as part of the Jewish nation, obligated to adhere to the things that are ruled by the Sanhedrin. It's why the Talmud, which is that whole set behind Ashira and Sarah, the Talmud is so important to the Jewish people. Those are the final works of law that were written by the final Sanhedrin in the Jewish people before we were exiled from the land of Israel. So, or even once we were exiled, but codified. So the last time the Jewish people were ever in the same place, in the same time, following the same rules, was in that generation. That is our constitution. Now, you could have other books try to add amendments or take things or change things or do things, but really, our understanding is you don't have the right to change something that we all accepted when we were living together in the same place in the same time. This group of rabbis instituted the holiday of Chanukah. So this is not the same as some rabbi 200 years ago saying, hey, it's a certain day of the week, we have a miracle happen in my family, let's celebrate. This is a national law. The way that any other rule in the Constitution becomes a national law. And it's very important to be aware that it wasn't just a holiday that is a celebration of a miracle. This is a law. It became a national holiday. And because of that, we observe it even all these thousands of years later when you wonder, what's the relevance of this story to my life? There may be more relevant miracles in modern Jewish history, but this one was instituted by our Sanhedrin. And so what do they institute? Shemonat hayimim halalu, these 8 days, שתחילתם מליל 25 בכסלו, from the night of the 25th of Kislev, that's Sunday night, ימי שמחה והלל. They're primarily instituted as days of joy and thanksgiving. So what does it mean, joy and thanksgiving? Hallel, literally there's a prayer that we recite, that we give thanks to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There is a debate among the rabbis if you actually have to be happy on Chanukah or not. That's an old debate. But was it really instituted to be happy? Or was it just instituted to give thanks? What's the practical difference? Tell me a practical difference. How do you legally fulfill the obligation of Judaism of being happy? It says in the Torah, on the holiday of Sukkot, V'samachta b'chagecha, you must be happy on your festival. What do you have to do? Okay, so there's things you don't do, right? You don't fast, you don't mourn, you don't, okay, tell me something else. Something you do. Yeah. King David says, yain, wine, yisamach levav enosh, will make a person's heart happy. Our rabbis always associate when there's an obligation of happiness, there is an obligation to consume a certain amount of wine. Not alcohol, not vodka, not tequila, not wine, specifically wine. Wine is considered a respectable beverage, and that is a mitzvah. How much? About a glass of wine. Don't think that it's anything. If you drink a glass of wine every day, then you're in a different story. But in Judaism, that glass of wine. And so is there an obligation on Chanukah to drink wine or not? It seems the Shulchan Aruch doesn't accept this as a final word, but the Rambam does. And now, after you're happy and you give thanks, and these 8 days, there's a side thing to do. Umadikim behem hanerot, and you light candles on these days. Ba'erev, in the evening. Al pitchei batim, in the entrance of your home. What does the entrance of your home mean? Where in the doorway?
Like that faces the street,
So this is my door. Let's say this is my house. That's my door. Where do I light?
I think near the mezuzah.
Okay. Other side of the mezuzah. Very good, Al-Khanan. So opposite whatever side the mezuzah is on. Where? Inside or outside?
Outside.
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 Outside. That's right.
I didn't spell the classrooms today.
Outside. My Jewish school tuition is paying off. Now, why do we light inside?
Because so the candles
So they don't blow out. So they used to blow out 2,000 years ago also. So why do they light outside?
they have better oil.
the oil.
Our oil is so much better than the oil they had. Think. Jonathan, you're living in Russia 500 years ago. And there are people looking to loot Jewish houses and burn them down to the ground. Where do you celebrate Chanukah? Inside, with your curtains closed. Lighting in a window that faces the street is a totally American innovation. It's because you have the freedom to show off your Chanukiah outside of your house. Until this generation, either you lit your Chanukiah outside because you were safe enough to show the whole world you celebrate Chanukah, or you hid it from everybody in the world so nobody would know you light Chanukah candles. This idea of lighting in your house but showing it to outside, it's a fairly recent innovation. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, just it's a new thing. V'yamim elu hena nikreim Chanukah. And these days are called Chanukah. By the way, if you go to Israel today, if you're in Jerusalem, nobody lights Chanukah candles in their house. You walk the streets and every house has Chanukah candles outside. How do they deal with the wind? They essentially light in like aquariums. So there's these glass boxes that have ventilation on the top. And you light inside and they kind of hang outside of your door. And they're beautiful. If you walk the streets of Israel, it's like cobblestone and candles everywhere. If you've never seen it before, it's worth going to Israel on Chanukah just once in your life to see what Chanukah looked like 2,000 years ago. And all the streets are lit up by these candles. And it's something unbelievable. You can even Google Chanukah in Jerusalem just to see some pictures. It's something unbelievable. That was the original way to celebrate Chanukah. V'hen asurin b'sefed v'tanit kimei Purim. So like Jonathan mentioned, because these days are days of happiness, we are prohibited from mourning during them. We can't fast on them. What does it mean prohibited from mourning? It says eulogizing, not necessarily mourning. If a person's family member dies, God forbid, on Chanukah, we bury them. We do mourn for them. But what do? We don't. What's sefed? Eulogy. What is eulogy? So we do have a shiva, but we don't eulogize. What is particular about eulogizing? What does it mean? No, we say Kaddish. What does it mean to give a eulogy? The speeches that are meant to make everybody sad, we don't say them. So we bury, we say Kaddish, we say all the prayers, but we skip anything that is excessive. So anything that doesn't need to be said right now, that's going to make everybody, what's the purpose of eulogy? The purpose of eulogy is to make everybody cry so that they miss the person that we're burying. Not on Chanukah. On Chanukah, it's almost like a silent funeral. There's a few times in the year where we do this. In the month of Nisan, right before Passover, the same thing. My grandmother was buried there. We didn't even, nothing. We just put it on the ground, said Kaddish. A month later, we said everything we need to say. There's a certain time where it's a national day of celebration. There are national days of mourning too. So something happy might happen to you on a national day of mourning. Celebrate your birthday. I have my sister-in-law, my aunt. Their birthday is Tisha B'Av. It's the 9th of Av. It's a national day of Jewish mourning. I guess it's the easiest birthday to celebrate because you don't do anything. But you don't even say happy birthday. It's not the right day for that. In Israel, on Israeli Memorial Day. So this is obviously not a Jewish holiday in terms of institution, but my brother was once in his dorm room in Israel practicing guitar, and a police officer gave him a ticket because you can't play music loud enough for people to hear it outside your window. It's a national day of mourning, which always boggles any Israeli mind when you see what American Memorial Day looks like. There are certain people who lost family members and they're mourning, and the rest of the country is barbecuing in the park, carnivals, popcorn, churros. It's not normal for us to see how do Americans appreciate or don't appreciate what Memorial Day looks like.
I had a debate with someone about that. It's interesting.
And I think that I've tried, and it's not in the mentality of American citizens. Memorial Day is not necessarily a sad day. It could be, but
They're more celebrating like the freedom that came of that.
right. So imagine that my grandmother died, and we said we're celebrating the freedom of her soul to return to heaven. Let's throw a party. Imagine what people say about us. Maimonides said they'd consider us to be cruel people. If someone dies, yeah, we believe they went to a better place. But if we're feeling happy about that, something is wrong with us. There's got to be a balance here of mixed emotions. At least mix some of the emotions in. And then he says final words. The only other holiday comparable to Chanukah is that of Purim. It's the other rabbinic holiday we celebrate. And essentially anybody who's obligated to hear the Megillah on Purim is obligated to light their own Chanukah candles. If you haven't figured it out yet, this week we're not going to get through all the halachot of Chanukah. That's going to happen next Sunday morning. I will tell you everything you need to know. How to light candles, what to do if you have an itch and you have to know before. So Monday and Tuesday, I'm giving classes on Chanukah in the Beit Knesset. You're welcome to join us on Zoom or in person in the evenings. But I came here to shift the frame of reference of the holiday of Chanukah. So first, Eitan, I hope you forgive me that I said that your story was a variation of the story. You hit a lot of the points, and everybody here did. But there's a fundamental part of the story which is not shared in the modern telling of the story of Chanukah. Everybody talks about oil, and the impure oil, and the candles, and the miracle that lasted for 8 days. And this is like the story of Chanukah. We're celebrating some miracle that happened 2,000 years ago. What's the miracle nobody talks about? The primary miracle, as the Rambam is retelling the story. It's political freedom. We regain our freedom, not to observe our own faith. The Maccabees were not these open-minded people. The Maccabees were on a massacre campaign. So it's ironic to me almost that people use Chanukah as like the story of interfaith harmony. It really wasn't. We were out there massacring Greeks. It wasn't, no harmony was happening in this holiday. But this was a revolution. It was a freedom-fighting revolution on behalf of the Jewish people to show the Greeks, this is our land. In your country, we have to listen to your rules. But in our country, you don't have. This is the Boston Tea Party of the Jewish people. We stood up and fought for what we believed to be our freedom. And we were ruthless about it, but we won. And the miracle, the primary miracle of Chanukah, is that the Jewish people regained their autonomy to rule over themselves in their own homeland. The nationalistic and political side of the story is a narrative that does not fit well with the current Jewish environment. The Jewish people, for better or for worse, and like I said, in this class, you don't have to accept my opinion, but I'm going to share it anyways. Jewish people, for better or for worse, have forgotten the side of them that is an independent, autonomous nation. And we have really become citizens of every place that we go, albeit with a minor, we have a different religion. That's all. We're the same as everybody else and everything else. We just have a different religion. And when Judaism is taught as a religion, if you would take a rose, you pick a rose in the garden, and you would pluck off all of its petals, and then you would hand somebody the rose. Would it smell like a rose? Yeah, if you put it in a vase of water, would it last as long as another rose would? It would. It's the same rose. It won't do. It won't look like a rose. If you go to your wife or your husband at anniversary and you get them a bouquet of roses with no petals, you pluck them all off. Nobody's going to be happy with you. The Judaism that we share today is a Judaism divorced from its national context. And so we teach people a Judaism, it smells like a rose, and even if you put it in the water, it'll grow like a rose. If you replant it, I don't know how you replant roses, but if it's possible, it would, but it doesn't look like a rose. It doesn't feel like a rose. It doesn't present as a rose because it's divorced from all of the rest of Judaism. And as we're not just a religion. In the blessing we say on the Torah, so in the morning you wake up and you say blessings on the Torah before you study Torah. What's the blessing? Modani. But then there's the same blessing when you get an aliyah. It's the same blessing. Say it slowly. Asher Bacha. Pause. Blessed are you, Hashem, who chose us from all the nations to be a nation. And then He gave us His Torah. So we have a two-part blessing. Hashem, you created us to be a nation. And then, as a nation, you gave us a Torah. Look what happens in the story of Chanukah. In section 1, the Jewish people, they are being oppressed by the Greeks. So what happens in number 2? They go and they fight for the temple. They go and they fight for their political autonomy. Only once they're done fighting and they've restored government do they even wake up and say, hey, let's go check out what's going on in the Beit HaMikdash. Because it's not relevant. Until the Jewish people have autonomy, there's no reason to start worshiping your religion. Our religion cannot happen in a context which is divorced from our autonomy as a people. And only after we've established the Jewish government in the land of Israel do they even interest themselves in going to go look for oil and lighting candles. That part of the miracle is only the second, it's the secondary part of the story of Chanukah. The primary part of the story of Chanukah is one that we're too afraid to talk about, or even we've decided not to talk about. That's exactly why there's purpose of today's shiur was. Now this may make some of us uncomfortable, and I'm aware of that, and I'm cognizant of. It's a difficult thing. It seems almost like some type of dual loyalty or whatever else might happen, and likely that's the case. But this is even more important because of where it is that you are studying. By now, hopefully, let me just stop this. By now, hopefully, most of you should be aware that you're studying in a Sephardic community. Now, we are not ethnically Sephardic like other communities might be, but whereas other communities might be ethnically Sephardic, they are most definitely not philosophically Sephardic. And we are very proud that we are a philosophically Sephardic community. As such, the religion which we teach here is always part of the Sephardic framework, which is Judaism. And most Sephardic Jews would be unable to explain to you what is Sephardic Judaism. They'll talk to you about special food that their grandmother used to make. They'll talk to you about the fact that they eat rice on Passover. They'll talk to you about all kinds of other nonsensical and very unimportant details. They would be like me saying, so what is Ashkenazi Judaism? And they say, gefilte fish and bagels and cream cheese and lox. That would be the definition of that. That would be like me, I don't know, taking another culture and turning it into the food that they eat or the music they listen to. There's an entire philosophy that fuels the Sephardic mindset. And it's exactly what sets our understanding of religion. We're the same religion as our fellow brothers and sisters of other ethnic backgrounds. But it's an entirely different understanding of that religion. Almost to the point where you could say, like I did on Shabbat and I regretted it, but I'm saying it again anyways, that we are biologically part of the same people. We're compatible to marry with each other and to pray with each other and to live with each other, not looking to create any disunity in that regard. But in terms of our religious, philosophical, theological stances, we are an entirely different religion. There is nothing in common in this world and the world that is, whatever title you'll use. To me, Orthodoxy is just as foreign as Reform Judaism is. Both of them don't fit into the context, which is the Sephardic worldview that all of these books were written in. And you who are hearing this today, in the beginning of this journey, it might be like, okay, I hear that, but I don't really understand all of its ramifications. Those of you who might have been on the other end of this process, you probably understand more applications of what it is that I'm saying. But I don't want to let you go without reading to you something. There's one of the most important texts that I've ever read to any class of mine. And it's time, Chanukah is a good time to introduce it. Some of you who've been around long enough may have heard this before, but it's worth listening to it again. There's a rabbi whose books I've recommended to you many times. I've seen that some of you have bought them. I think you too bought The Gospel According to the Jews. Also, right? Rabbi Joseph Haor. Rabbi Yosef Haor, I have 2 videos about him on YouTube. One is like 10 minutes and one is 30 minutes. If you have the time, listen to them. Rabbinic personality of the last generation. He died last year. And perhaps was one of the last genuine Sephardic rabbis who walked the face of this earth. I don't know that we will ever again have rabbis like him in our people. I'm not certain that we can ever restore that type of rabbinic leadership. I want to read to you from the introduction to one of his earlier works in English. And to maybe think about Judaism in this context, at least for the next 2 weeks, as you celebrate Chanukah. Chacham Haor says, autonomy, rather than freedom, is the basic concept underlying the Sephardic tradition. So I'll say that again. Autonomy, rather than freedom, is the basic concept underlying the Sephardic tradition. Autonomy means self-government according to one's own laws and values. A society is autonomous when the ordering of human conduct and the adjustment of human relations are relative to its own criteria and interests. Jewish people, at least in the Sephardic tradition, are not looking for freedom. We've always asked for one thing, autonomy. Autonomy means to allow ourselves to govern ourselves based on our own criteria and interests. It presupposes a law, independent of political and religious bureaucracies, as the only source of government and authority. Spiritually, this concept finds ultimate expression in the idea of a historical berit, a covenant, not just any covenant, but in Jewish tradition, we don't believe in a covenant between us and the Creator, but a bilateral covenant. What does bilateral mean? It goes two ways. There are obligations in both directions. Yes, we accepted the covenant that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the creator of the universe, offered. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu also accepted our conditions and terms, which is probably the only faith on earth. I say probably just to be humble. We are the only faith on earth that believes that we are in a bilateral relationship with the creator of the universe. He's equally obligated to us as we are to him. It means that if God were to do X, Y, or Z, he would be in contempt of his own rules. And I'm saying he because God is not a he or a she, but it's just easier for me. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu would then ultimately lose out on us as a people if he were to renege on certain agreements that we made many thousands of years ago. Freely entered into by God and the people of Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai, and later reiterated in the plains of Moab. This covenant established the law, not a law, but the law, with all the norms and regulations that govern the people of Israel. Accordingly, the autonomy of Israel is the effect of the covenant, and it is guaranteed by God and the people. This covenant is sacred and eternal. As sacred, the law does not depend on promulgation, cannot be subject to abrogation by any authority, human or divine. Meaning, we can't change this covenant, but neither can the creator of the universe. This is an agreement like any other legally binding agreement. Some of this is a little more technical. As a Jewish people who begin to realize very quickly that we are going to lose our territorial control over the land of Israel, and we might find ourselves in exile, which has lasted us so far 2,000 years, since we've been exiled from the land of Israel. Jewish legal institutions had to reflect, what is Judaism going to look like when we don't have our land anymore? National integrity, says Chamfauer, is the effect of the internal legal institutions governing the people, not of their ability to control a particular geographical area. We very quickly understand that our divine bilateral covenant means that we maintain our integrity as a people when we govern ourselves, not that we still own land in the land of Israel. This idea of national autonomy may be described as the theological, political form of government, in contradistinction with the political, bureaucratic form of government in which absolute sovereignty constitutes the basis of authority and establishes the right for the civil and criminal administration of justice. The survival of the people of Israel is a direct result of this belief. As they were losing all forms of earthly power, they became more and more aware that their national integrity was not predicated upon territorial sovereignty, and that the bureaucratic political system of authority is incompatible with the idea of a berit. We are rabbinic people going into exile, realizing that this land may not be ours forever. Maybe divinely it's our land forever, but we won't have it forever. And that our freedom as a people is not dependent on this land, but it's dependent on our ability to uphold our autonomy. Autonomy meaning our ability to self-govern, regardless of where we are. It is pertinent to know that galut, exile, in the Sephardic tradition. Why does he say Sephardic tradition? Because Ashkenazi tradition has an entirely different understanding of galut. When Ashkenazi Jews talk about exile, they don't mean the same thing that I mean when I talk about exile. It is pertinent to know that galut, exile, in the Sephardic tradition is principally a political concept. In its barest form, it means that the Jewish nation was not dissolved with the territorial loss of its homeland. Accordingly, the Sephardim viewed themselves as members of the Jewish nation rather than Jewish religion. So, a Sephardic Jew, maybe before this generation, are you Jewish or are you Moroccan? We'll tell you, there's no such thing as a Moroccan Jew. I'm a Jewish person, part of the autonomous Jewish people, who is currently occupying land in Morocco that doesn't belong to me. So who do you belong to? Where is your citizenship? Do you want Moroccan citizenship? Of course not. Why would I want citizenship of another country? I'm a citizen of the Jewish people. If I were to have a passport, before there were passports, my passport would say, a member of the autonomous Jewish nation in exile. Now that sounds like those crazy people that go to court and say, your laws don't apply to me because I'm a member of the free world. Yeah, but we're just as crazy. That's our stance. The reason why, according to dry Jewish law, we don't summon each other to regular courts unless there's a reason to, is precisely because we don't believe that a regular court has authority to preside over legal matters between two members of a nation. An American court can't rule in a dispute between two Canadian citizens. It doesn't work that way. They would like to, but they can't. The theological political idea of an autonomy and national integrity implies a democratic society that recognizes the law as its supreme authority. However, in order that the law should be the actual source of authority in government, there is a need for a legal code, formulated in precise and clear language. So in order to say, I belong to an autonomous nation, we have our own laws, our own regulations. Which laws and regulations do you have? Have you ever talked to a Jewish person about their family's traditions? Oh, I come from this community, so we do this, and I come from that family, and we do that. And everybody does whatever they want. You can't do that. You can't say, oh, I'm a citizen of California, but I'm from Arizona. My family comes from Arizona. So over here, we do all the things we used to do in Arizona. Nobody would take you seriously. The Jewish people have a legal code. In order for us to belong to the same nation and follow the same laws, we have to agree on one legal code. Maimonides' codification of the entire system of Jewish law, we just read from that codification, was designed to perform this function. The publication of the Shulchan Aruch, the legal code of Rabbi Yosef Karo, which we adhere to here, and its formal acceptance by the Sephardic communities across the world as the supreme code of law, projected in all its fullness the ideal of a democratic society first proclaimed by the Lord in Israel at the foot of Mount Sinai. It is also an emphatic rejection of the bureaucratic political system that governs through casuistry and manipulation of the law. In such a system, the people have no access to the law. The law is not the ground of authority, but its effect. It is worth pointing out that the codification of law and formulation in precise categories and intelligible language does not impair its growth and development. Sephardic Jews produced two legal codes. Maimonides' legal code, this one, and the Shulchan Aruch, that one on the shelf. Both of which in different parts of history were adhered to completely. What does that mean? Just I can explain to you what it means. You're a Jew living in Morocco. Your business partner is in another Sephardic country, Turkey. And the third of you get into a business arrangement with a Jew from Iran. And now there's problems. You find yourself in Egypt because you're traveling the Middle East. In Egypt, that rabbinic court follows the same exact legal code as the court in Morocco, in Iran, and in Turkey. And if that bedin, that rabbinic court, would arbitrate a financial matter between the three of you, it would be binding in any single Sephardic country you went to. You would bring the document you received from that court, and every other Sephardic country would recognize the legality of the ruling of that country, because we all adhere to the same penal code, the same criminal code, that's called the Shulchan Aruch. It's not a religious book, it's a political book. And it worked for almost 2,000 years in different forms. Ashkenazi Jews were entirely disconnected from this reality. Every community, every village, every town had its own religion. Every rabbi had his own court, his own people, everything was different. You go from one place to the next place, it's a whole other experience. A system that worked across continents, definitely not. And the biggest attack on Sephardic codes of Jewish law by Ashkenazi authorities was that they're so simple. Those codes of law have dumbed down Judaism to do this, don't do that. What happened to the brilliance of the Talmudic rabbis? And it's very simple. Whereas there may be constitutional scholars, when it comes though to explaining to a regular citizen why I stopped you at a red light, because you went through it. Instead of waiting, a police officer doesn't start giving you a whole legal conversation of where this law came into and who has the authority. It doesn't make a difference. Right now I'm stopping you and this is a ticket and that's your name on the top of the ticket. You have your day in court. The reason? Codification of law and its formulation in precise categories and intelligible language does not impair its growth and development. Just like the proper formulation of the laws of physics by Newton and Einstein did not impair the growth of science, but helped to eliminate the morass of chaos and confusion prevailing in the field. Because Sephardic rabbis were able to explain their laws so clearly, it just got rid of the confusion. No matter where you went, people did the same thing. Chanukah here and Chanukah there were the same laws. Shabbat here and Shabbat there, people did the same thing. Different foods, different cultures. But in terms of how they heated up that food on Shabbat, or which Sidur they used to pray with, things were more or less uniform. And when you explain something simply, it doesn't impair law. It just makes it that much more accessible. More than that, and I have to say, he doesn't write it here.
Isn't it more so kind of a Peshat type of approach, where you're giving people the plain and simple and helping them really get a grounding and an understanding in that, so that then they can elucidate in any way they want, but they've got the foundation.
I think it's more than that, if I can. I think there's you see, when you belong to a community where the rabbi has the final word, who determines what you do on Shabbat or doesn't do on Shabbat? You ask the rabbi. The rabbi tells you, do it or don't do it. Okay, now you really wanted to do that thing on Shabbat. So what ammunition do you have on the rabbi? What do you do there? You want to be able to do the thing he said you can't do. What do? You ask another rabbi, meaning you go to the next shtetl, you go to the next village over, and you ask the rabbi there because he has a different religion. In Sephardic tradition, it doesn't work that way. You could be a 7-year-old kid like Elchanan, and you go take the code of law down from the shelf. And you say, Rabbi, listen, you told me I can't play with that on Shabbat. But right here in chapter 323, subsection 4, it seems that I should be able to play with that toy on Shabbat. What's your answer? Now, you now have the ability to challenge authority. The reason why authority is not scared is because they subscribe to the same code. And if you could show that I'm held in violation of the code I suppose that I'm upholding, then I have to give in to you, or at least explain to you why my legal methodology brought me to a different conclusion. In Ashkenaz, the first thing that happened by the publication of the Rambam's Code of Law, or the Shulchan Aruch, is, wow, people are going to use it to challenge our authority. We don't like when people challenge our authority. So what are we going to do? We're going to burn those books. Why? We will not give access to the people to be able to understand the law. It's more than pshat. Our rabbis believed in liberating people by giving them accessibility to the law. And if you write it in some fancy way that people can't understand it, then you are taking away their power to be part of a national people. They essentially become just peasants like any other culture in the world in which there were classes of people, those who understood and those who didn't. So whereas Hasidic thought likes to come and say they championed for the simple people and they came into the world to free them, all of that is a narrative that doesn't really, I mean, it's beautiful, but it's a completely different story. Here, I don't want freedom dancing in the synagogue. I want freedom that you shouldn't be able to impose on my business practices or interfere with my marriage or get involved in my raising of my children unless the legal code that I subscribe to by being a citizen of the Jewish people will allow for you to do that. I'll read you one last sentence. I will have to read you the whole book, but one last sentence. Chacham Foer is a Sephardic rabbi, and as such, he's not apologetic. The enormous volume of legal literature produced by the Sephardic tradition and its superior quality, that's a pretty humble statement, testifies to the validity of our point. Says Chacham Foer, for 2,000 years, Sephardic Jews operated as an autonomous people that were governed by an autonomous legal system. We had our own codes of law. Everywhere that you went, follow those same laws. What does that have to do with Chanukah? I'll tell you. When the Jewish people went into exile, let's talk about Chanukah first. In Chanukah, what we essentially lost, worshiping our faith, not worshiping our, was a minor detail compared to the violation of our right. You don't have the right to tell me in my land not to observe my faith properly, to take my money. On whose authority are you seizing my house? Are you seizing my property? On whose authority are you taking my wife or my daughters or my husbands or my sons? Who gave you the right? We operate within a divine covenant. Are you part of that covenant? You're not. Get out of here. At a certain point in time, there was only a very small group of Jews who felt that Judaism was worth fighting for. Those were the Kohanim. It makes sense they were the Kohanim. They were part of the people who understood everything, all the nuance that Jewish tradition, the freedom that Jewish tradition would give its people. And because of that, they went to war. And they were successful. And they restored a government. And that's the miracle of Chanukah. The finding of the oil, it's like the cherry on top. That was our divine kiss. It was Hashem saying, you know what? You did good. That was, what you did was right. I'm coming to give my contribution also. Here's your jug of oil. It lasted for 8 days. Wonderful. We'll talk another week about who cares how long the oil lasted. By the way, the oil lasted for 8 days. The first day was a miracle? No, because the oil was supposed to last for 1 day. So how many days of miracle was it? 7. So why is Chanukah 8 days and not 7 days? Because the miracle was really only 7 days. Rabbi Yosef Cairo asked this question. I've counted at least 100 answers to this question. Think about it. Why 8 days of Chanukah, not 7 days? Maybe next week I'll share some answers. But for right now, the miracle was the HaShamayim, the Maccabees, were able to restore to us our political freedom, our ability to govern ourselves and not have to govern ourselves according to the Greeks' understanding of our culture. When it comes to modern Jewish history, Ashkenazi Jews entered exile, and they had the most miserable 2,000 years of their experience. Our exile wasn't so great either. But in that exile, they lost any ability to think of themselves as a nation. They primarily became a religion, a philosophy. The various Ashkenazi groups and Hasidic subgroups and all, they all share beautiful ideas of a religion. Somebody once asked me recently, Chassidut, and what my take on Chassidut. I think Chassidut is an incredible, powerful force of self-improvement. Something Chassidut lacks entirely is vision for the Jewish nation. Hasidic philosophy is a very self-centered philosophy. How do I fix myself? How do I connect to the Creator? How do I pray better? How do I worship better? How do I reach loftier philosophical visions? And how do I? What about us? What about the whole world? What about the Jews that are not going to pray or eat or keep kosher or do Shabbat? What about non-Jews? Where do non-Jews fit in that philosophy? And so as such, I see it as a very limited, self-centered philosophy that might work very well to help you grow. But it does not provide a vision that our rabbis believe for the whole world. When it comes to Sephardic Jews, our experience in exile was wait till I'm done, Baba, was just as miserable. People killed us and massacred us and all kinds of wonderful things too. But there was a difference. We never lost our freedom. We never lost our autonomy in every single country. So I'll in a moment, because I see the time, we had a king in the land of Israel. We lost the king, and the Romans occupied the Jewish people. So I skipped a few hundred years, yeah. But the Romans are occupying us. We don't have a king anymore, but we have Rabbi Yehuda. Do you know his last name? It wasn't really his last name, it was his title. Who wrote the Mishnah? Rabbi Judah. No, that would be nice, but not him. Rabbi Yehuda, who wrote the Mishnah? Devar Meir, tell me. I don't hear you. I think your microphone isn't working. But I read your lips, and it says Hanasi. Yeah? Hanasi means the prince. When we lost our kingdom, we didn't lose our princes. The royal family still ruled over the Jewish people. Once we lost our princes, yeah, so we reached a place in which the Nisi'im were no longer. In Sephardic communities, we had what were called Negidim. A Nagid is like a governor, imagine. It's not a king, he's definitely not a prince, but he led the Jewish people politically. He allowed for the Jewish people, for example, in Egypt, Maimonides was a Nagid. So he essentially was the advocate to the Egyptian government. Whatever taxes you want, we'll pay you those taxes. But you are going to give us in turn the ability to tax and to judge and to rule over our people independently. So we lived in Egypt, not as citizens of Egypt, but as citizens of an autonomous Jewish nation living in Egypt. And yes, sir, they wanted money. Fine. So our Jewish community would tax us. We paid taxes not to the IRS, but to the Jewish IRS. And that Jewish IRS took out that portion and gave whatever was needed to give to the... But that meant that if I fought with my friend, we went to a rabbinic court. That lasted all the way through Jewish history in Turkey, in Iraq, Khambashi, the chief rabbi. The chief rabbi didn't just, sit and meditate over a prayer book all day. If someone needed to go to prison, there were Jewish prisons. If somebody needed to rule and take between two people, there was a fight and I have to seize your property to pay back this business partner, the chief rabbi in his court and his police system had the ability to do such things. I'm thinking of Morocco. Morocco until today. If you go into any court, you walk inside, it'll say Muslims this way, Jews this way, because the Jews were not allowed to go to Muslim courts. The Muslim government recognized our need for autonomy. And they paid, it was something unique in Morocco. The Muslim country supported the chief rabbi. The chief rabbi had almost a palace of his own right. And his courts met gold and silver and marble floors. You should see the thing. And all those rabbis, the moment they were given the chance to leave to Israel, they got in a boat and they left. Because to them, all of that, there's a few rabbis left in Morocco to run whatever left of the Jewish community. But Sephardic Jews, though they recognized that land wasn't what made them autonomous or not, when given the opportunity to return, they left. They didn't need the gold and the silver and the marbles. They needed their land also. Until when did Sephardic Jews govern themselves? Until what year? 1948. Sephardic Jews ran independent Jewish governments in every single country they were in until 1948. Ironically, when they came to the land of Israel, and they came to a new state of Israel that didn't recognize rabbinic authority at all, Sephardic Jews, for the first time in history, began being governed by Jews who didn't believe in the divinity of their tradition. Which, if you, as Zionistic as I am, and as proud as I am about our accomplishments in the state of Israel, for me, one of the most celebrated days in Jewish history is the 5th of Iyar's Israeli Independence Day in 1948. It's also one of the most tragic days in Jewish history. Jewish history, Sephardic Jews didn't lose their autonomy to the Greeks, to the Romans. We didn't lose to the Egyptians, and we didn't lose to the Iraqis, or to the Moroccans, or the Libyans, or the Tunisians. We lost our autonomy to Israel. And I know that this might be a very big thought to wrap your head around. But essentially, Sephardic tradition ended in 1948. What we're trying to rebuild since then is something completely different. And it's a very scary conversation, because in Israel, it has turned into a conversation of, do you want a democracy or do you want a theocracy? And if you want a democracy and you don't want Israel to look like ISIS cutting people's heads off, then don't let those rabbis get their way. Now, it could be that there are some rabbis in Israel definitely that would love for Israel to look like ISIS. I'm certain of it. And if they were given the power, tomorrow the beheadings would start in Jerusalem or Bnei Brak or wherever they're hanging out. I'm not talking about those type of rabbis either. Those are not my rabbis. But Judaism that I believe in, that Sephardic tradition believes in, is one that existed until 1948. Where we are today is a topic for a different conversation. We'll get to Israeli Independence Day, we'll have those conversations. But the story of Chanukah is as relevant as ever. Because I believe that if there's any generation in Sephardic tradition that ever needed to believe in its ability to rise up and reclaim its own autonomy politically, nationally, and therefore religiously, it's this generation. It's the first generation of Sephardic Jews, which are not governed by themselves. And here I believe that this vision would be good, not just for Sephardic Jews. Ashkenazi Jews would benefit from this greatly, and non-Jews would benefit from this greatly. The world would benefit from seeing a Jewish people restored to what the Torah believed in and the prophets believed in, a world in which we could finally be that lighthouse to the world and take care of the world and all of its spiritual needs. But we're so far removed from that because we don't even know that the holiday that we're celebrating was instituted into Jewish tradition to remind us never to give up the hope of regaining our national autonomy. And I'll end you with one thought. Our rabbis instituted a holiday. And this holiday was the holiday of Chanukah, in which you're supposed to take candles and light those candles in every single Jewish. It's an Ashkenazi innovation. No, in every single Jewish home. In fact, according to Sephardic tradition, we don't light candles in a synagogue. And even later day Sephardim who light candles in a synagogue, we don't bless on those candles in the synagogue. And even later day Sephardim who have already started blessing on the candles in the synagogue, if they go somewhere else, like a wedding or a shopping center or a big event at a beach, they won't light a Chanukiah with blessings. The reason is very simple. The whole story of Chanukah is that our national institutions lost. They were crushed. They were destroyed. Our temple was corrupt. Our rabbinic leadership didn't care to fight for itself. So when our national leaders are not doing what they're supposed to do, we're still in this bilateral covenant. And if the leaders choose to opt out of the bilateral covenant, who's supposed to uphold that covenant? We the people, regular citizens. The holiday of Chanukah was instituted for our homes to show Jewish leadership in every single generation. If you won't do what's right, we'll do what's right. We don't light Chanukah candles in a synagogue because a synagogue is the place that lost. The synagogue did not uphold the Jewish faith in the story of Chanukah. The temple allowed for itself to be desecrated in the story of Chanukah. We light candles at home because we tell our children, like Elchanan and Avinoam and the Shir and Hodea that are watching right now, We tell our children in every single generation, if you see rabbinic leadership, Jewish leadership, Israeli national leadership fail you, that's not the end of you as a people. You as a people begin in your living room, outside your front door, or if it's too scary, inside. But that's what we do. Because the whole purpose of this holiday is that we, the people, have the right, we have the control, we are the ones in the covenant, not these big fancy people with big fancy names. And you better believe that Jewish leadership, as well as the world around us, is not at all receptive to hear a message that is, we are rebels, and that we will fight in any given moment to take back what is ours. The rabbis definitely don't want to hear it. The yeshivot definitely don't want to hear it. The Israeli government certainly doesn't want to hear it. And the non-Jewish governments around us that are afraid that we might become a group of Maccabees and march our way back to Israel, as much as they would love for us to leave, but not that way. It's not the way they want us to leave. And so the story of Chanukah, the real story of Chanukah, is really a hidden story. And every year when I watch Jews celebrating Chanukah, I see they're all celebrating a skeleton of a holiday. It's like a shell of a holiday. But the inside of the holiday, I don't even think that they know what they're celebrating. And so this Chanukah, before we talk about the laws of which direction to light and which oil you should use and which wicks and where, by the door, by the living room, the right side of the doorway, the left side of the doorway, all of that is irrelevant if we don't understand why we're celebrating Chanukah. And that was the purpose of today's shiur. God willing, Monday and Tuesday I'll be doing more intense Chanukah study. But everything, if you're not able to attend, everything we need to know for Chanukah, we will study next Sunday morning. Thank you so much for listening to me today.